I'd like to welcome you to the 7th Annual Bay Path College Are You a Bookie Book Club Gathering and Kaleidoscope event. And I'd like to start by thanking Brianna Sittler, who is our organizer extraordinaire and has done a beautiful job in working with Suzanne Strapek-Shea, our writer-in-residence, to invite this lovely panel of authors and our keynote speaker, and to create this event for us. I'm Leanna James Blackwell, writing professor and director of the new online Master of Arts program in creative nonfiction at Bay Path, and a book lover since forever. If you were here in this room on this spectacular June day, instead of tending to your flower garden, or relaxing on your sunny deck, or floating in a pool with a glass of iced tea in your hand, it means only one thing. You love books as much as we do. You might be the kind of person who goes to the library to get one book and comes home with a stack. Maybe you are the first person to finish the book your book club is reading, the one who always brings notes and questions to the meeting, the one who always has suggestions about the next book to read. And I'll bet that when you were growing up, you are the one who stayed up late reading under the covers long after you were supposed to be asleep. I did, even when my flashlight ran out of batteries. I remember once actually crouching down on the rug by my bed and finishing the chapter I was reading in the tiny glow of the nightlight. And this was a book I'd read before, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, from the Chronicles of Narnia, if memory serves. That is what a good book can do. It can make us postpone sleep, make us care passionately about people who don't exist or whom we'll never meet, change our heart rate, and actually change our hearts by opening up new worlds, novel ideas, and uncommon experiences through the simple but profoundly powerful magic of words on a page. And that, I'm pleased to say, is what the books written by our guest speakers today will do if you have the pleasure of reading them, and I hope you do. Today we are honored to hear from keynote speaker Judge Michael Ponsor, Senior District Judge in the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts Western Division, and author of the newly released thriller, The Hanging Judge. On the author panel, we have writer Michelle Barker, who will read and discuss her second historical novel, Mending Horses, Bay Path professor John Jarvis, who will read from and discuss his new biography, Johnny Paleface Becomes a Human Being, and our writer-in-residence, Suzanne Strapek-Shea, who will read from and discuss her nonfiction book, This is Paradise, An Irish Mother's Grief and African Village's Plight. We invite you to stay after the readings to get your books signed and personally meet these remarkable authors. We also hope that you will invite them to speak to your book club. Writers are generally delighted to speak to anyone who's interested in their books, and especially to book clubs. Often they will travel for an afternoon or an evening with your club, or will happily join you virtually via Skype or on a speakerphone. Just ask. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Judge Michael A. Ponsor. Judge Ponsor served 10 years as a U.S. magistrate judge before being appointed a United States District Judge by President Bill Clinton in 1994. He has served on the Judicial Conference Committee on the Administration of the Magistrate Judge System. Yes, I practiced saying that. On the Committee on the Budget, as chair of the Committee on Space and Facilities, and on the conference's ad hoc advisory committee on judicial planning. Judge Ponsor was born in Chicago, grew up outside St. Louis and later Minneapolis, and spent his senior year in high school as an American Field Service exchange student in Finland. His international education also includes a year teaching at the Kenya Institute of Administration in Nairobi, before he graduated from Harvard in 1969, and also includes 2 years reading English language and literature as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, where he overlapped 1 year with Bill Clinton. He graduated from Yale Law School in 1975, practiced law in Boston and then in Amherst, before joining the bench as a magistrate judge in 1984. The Western Division in Springfield, where Judge Ponsor sits, has responsibility for the 4 counties of western Massachusetts, comprising some 800,000 people and 100 cities and towns. His docket has included a number of high-profile cases, including U.S. v. Gilbert, the first capital trial in Massachusetts in more than 50 years. In 2013, he published his first novel, The Hanging Judge, a New York Times bestseller. I'm very pleased to let you know. And it was inspired by, well, why don't we find out from the writer himself? Please join me in welcoming Judge Michael Ponsor.
Well, thank you. This is really fun. I'm so pleased to be here. I want to begin by thanking Bay Path College and my dear friend, Suzanne Strepik-Shea, for inviting me to speak to you, and my brothers and sisters here in the literary life. This event, which I understand is now in its 7th rendition, is the gift of Suzanne's wonderful imagination, the organizational skills of Brianna Sittler, and the overhanging intelligence of Liana James Blackwell. The writer's life can be isolating, and it is a true delight to come together with people here today who enjoy books. Before I leave the topic of Suzanne, I hope everyone has picked up or will be picking up her excellent new book, This is Paradise. I have started reading it, and it is a treat, as all of Suzanne's books are. For the past 30 years, I have been a federal judge, presiding over matters within federal jurisdiction in this part of the state. My claim to be a writer was born only about 6 months ago when The Hanging Judge was published last December. What on earth am I doing here? And how can I have the temerity to speak, even for 20 minutes, to so many others who have so much more experience in this world than I do? My subject today will be how the power of imagination, expressed in the case of writers through language, informs both the world of the law and the world of fiction. I'm going to suggest to you some of the basic ways in which a life in the law and a literary life share their essence, how similar, in some ways, both worlds are. I had an experience some years back about how the ambiguous use of language can entirely capsize an imagined story narrative and even reality itself, with humiliating results. This little homily, which is something that actually happened to me, provides a good jumping off spot for the thoughts I want to offer to you in these remarks today. When I first moved out to Western Massachusetts from Boston, I was practicing law in Amherst at a small law firm. There were only 3 of us as attorneys there, and we had an office manager by the name of Kathy, who was sort of the mother to the lost boys in the law firm. She kept everything running on time. She had a beautiful young daughter named Gwen. And Gwen would pop into the office from time to time. She was about a junior or senior in high school. I was an unmarried lawyer in my late 20s or early 30s, and Gwen and I would flirt sometimes. She'd stick her head in the office and we'd chat, and she'd twinkle and go away, and I would stare out the window for a while thinking. Her life went on, and my life went on, and Kathy would sometimes give me a smile about all this. Fast forward, I don't know, maybe it's 7 or 8 years, and I'm at Gwen's wedding. She's getting married to a lovely man. It's at Amherst College, at the Amherst College Chapel, and we're at the reception afterwards. And I'm standing with Kathy, and we're talking about her daughter Gwen, the bride, and how beautiful she looks, and what a grand day this is for Kathy and her family. And Kathy looks at me and she says, "You know, Michael, I always wished that you had married Gwen." I went, whoa, what a thing for the mother of the bride to say. And so Of course, I'm thinking about this, and after a minute or two, I think, well, why not? Any mother would be proud to have me as a son-in-law. And so I start talking to her, saying, well, you know, the groom doesn't look like a bad guy. I think they're going to have a wonderful marriage, and sometimes we can't have everything that we would like to have, and I think you'll probably get along with him very well, and they seem like a beautiful couple, but I can understand why you would be disappointed. Gwen is Kathy is looking at me with greater and greater sympathy, and finally, she gently puts her hand on my arm and says to me, Michael, when I said I wish you had married Gwen, I meant I wish you had performed the ceremony. Pride has its fall. Language and imagination create narratives in our minds that are sometimes more powerful than what is going on in real life. Many of us in this room, I suspect, share the somewhat embarrassing cast of mind that gives as much force, as much reality to scenes that never happened or never could happen, but that we've imagined or that are depicted in stories, as the credence we give to things that happen in so-called real life, whatever that is. Speaking for myself, for example, there are few experiences that I have actually lived through that equal in vividness my memory of the scene in Treasure Island when Jim Hawkins has scurried up the rigging to escape the murderous pirate Israel Hands. The pirate, you will remember, is coming up after him slowly because the pirate is wounded, and Jim Hawkins has pistols, the powder of which may or may not have gotten wet. And he says, "One more step, Mr. Hands, and I'll blow your brains out." I feel, even as I stand here now, remembering the scene, that I can almost smell the breeze and feel the rocking and hear the creaking of that boat tipped on its side in the inlet. And a minute later, after Hands, shot dead, falls into the clear blue water, I can see the pirate's body curled on the bottom with, as Stevenson describes, the curious fish swimming around it. Few experiences in life, and I have had 67 years so far with much that has been incredibly intense and exciting, but few experiences that I've had can equal the color and vividness in my mind of that fictional scene. It is easy without thinking much to recall other powerful imagined scenes. We read, Mrs. Dalloway said she would buy the flowers herself. 9 words occupying their own separate paragraph, and suddenly a window is thrown open to an entire world in London right after World War I, and its entire culture and consciousness come flooding into us. Or how about Magwitch in the graveyard near the blacksmith shop in Great Expectation? Our protagonist describes him as a man who had been soaked in water and smothered in mud and lamed by stones and cut by flints and stung by nettles and torn by briars, who limped and shivered and glared and growled, and whose teeth chattered in his head as he seized me by the chin. "Oh, don't cut my throat, sir," I pleaded in terror. "Pray don't do it, sir." "Tell us your name," said the man. "Quick." "Pip, sir." How often in life do we experience anything like that? Now, how does this world of intensely imagined fiction find any comfortable relationship to the courtroom where I have spent the last 30 years? In court, we are concerned with facts, verifiable facts, based on the testimony of witnesses under oath or on documentary or physical evidence admissible under the applicable rules. Facts are found in civil cases based on a preponderance of the evidence, and facts are found in criminal cases based upon the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. How can these legal proceedings overlap with the universe of deliberate fiction, where worlds are founded on the projections of imagination and on facts made of vapor that never existed? I have come to the conclusion over my now fairly long career that in the end, law is art. Law at its core is a kind of fiction, not in the sense that it is false or untrue, because in the etymological sense we might call it fictive, from the Latin verb facere, to make. The basic precepts of our legal system are not to be found in nature, springing up on their own. Rather, they are made, imagined by human beings, using the same areas of the brain that we use to create and enjoy a fictional narrative. As a community embracing the law, we invent the idea of a system of rules that can be agreed upon ahead of time and applied the same to everyone, regardless of their strengths or their affiliations or their status. We call this equal protection under the law, the words across the top of the Supreme Court building in Washington. Equal protection under the law. It is a crazy, unnatural ideal, haltingly formed over the centuries at great sacrifice. In history and in the world today, equal protection under the law is, in fact, very rare. In most places, it is a joke, and a person can get very badly hurt or even suggesting it. On the whole, the strong have told and continue to tell everyone else what to do, and if they don't do it, they are killed or chased into the woods. Who says people deserve equal protection under the law? Why? The Fifth Amendment of our Constitution says that no one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. No one shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Who says? How come? Where'd that idea come from? The rule of nature, as Thucydides tells us, is that the strong do what they will and the weak suffer what they must. There is no due process under law. Our system of law expresses and embodies our deepest yearning to make, that is, create, out of the powerful recesses of our imagination, a fair, sensible, and predictable world. It is a powerful dream here in the United States, still very flawed, very much a work in progress. But such as it is, we as a community hold up these principles of due process and equal protection by the sheer power of our continuing belief in them. Nothing but the breath from our upturned faces. That's what keeps it up. That's what keeps the legal system up. That's what keeps our ability to come here today without having anybody kick in the doors and chase us away, because we're getting together and talking about these things. And the breath that holds up the basic principles that make the nurturing structure of law possible has no more concrete reality than the breath coming in and out of Jim Hawkins's lungs as he watches Israel hands clambering up the rigging towards him. The essence of what we are is what we create through our imaginations. The products of our imagination, whether they take form in legal ideals or in fictional narratives, are both unreal and the realest things we have. People devote their lives, and sometimes give their lives, to uphold ideals that come out of our imaginations and sustain their reality through the intensity of our belief in them. My book is about a death penalty trial, and my own death penalty trial, the real death penalty trial, which took place in 2000 and 2001, is fading into my memory, almost to the point where the fictional death penalty trial, which is entirely different, has a greater and more powerful reality in my mind than the trial that I actually sat on. There's a scene in my book where an 11-year-old boy, the son of the murder victim, takes the stand and testifies to try to save the life of the man who's been convicted of killing his mother. I read the scene. This is extraordinarily admission of narcissism. Having written it and read it dozens of times, and I always tear up at the power of my own writing. And the scene has a vividness to me now that is greater than almost any scene I've actually experienced in the hundreds and hundreds of trials that I have actually presided over. So this imaginative power that we celebrate today takes its form in fiction, in unreality, and in the reality that our imaginations create, which are the basic stuff of who we are, whether they take shape in stories, narratives, or in a legal system where our ideals are embodied. So, use your imagination. But be careful when the mother of a pretty woman asks if you will marry her daughter. Remember, reality sometimes may be different from what you imagine. Thank you very much. Keep writing, keep maintaining your imagination and your reverence for the creations of others. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you very, very much, Judge Ponsor, for an absolutely delightful talk. I enjoyed every moment of it, and I can't wait to read your book. It's now my pleasure to introduce the writers on our author panel. Professor John Jarvis teaches culture-intensive courses in Native American Studies and Global Humanities at Bay Path College. He was born and raised on the Lemhi, Shoshone, and Nez Perce Indian reservations in Idaho. From this base in American cultures, he went on to live and work in France, Switzerland, and Monaco for 5 years in his early teaching career. Jarvis earned his master's degree in French and Russian and his doctorate in American Studies from Washington State University. He co-authored the successful college writing textbook, Writing About the World, and has published numerous articles on foreign language learning, American culture, and Native American cultures. His recent biography, Johnny Paleface Becomes a Human Being, was written during 10 years of in-depth interviews with his subject and weaves in the oral tradition of Native American storytelling. The book tells the story of a 97-year-old Native American man born on a Navajo reservation in New Mexico who fought in 3 wars, endured pervasive and systemic prejudice, and ultimately found a way to make spiritual peace in a troubled world. Welcome, John. And then, yes. Michelle Barker, the second person on our author panel, calls herself a time traveler. In other words, an author, archivist, and historical consultant. She got a first-hand taste of 19th century New England rural life when she was a costumed historical interpreter at Old Sturbridge Village. There she milked cows, mucked out barns, and found inspiration for her historical novels, A Difficult Boy, which won awards from Penn New England and the International Reading Association, and Mending Horses, which was a 2011 Faulkner Wisdom Award semifinalist and which we'll hear about today. Barker is also the author of Images of America, Chicopee, and co-author with Tom Shea and Suzanne Strempek Shea of 140 Years of Providential Caring, the Sisters of Providence of Holyoke, Mass. She also worked as an archivist for the Springfield History Museums, where, she tells us, she enjoyed a unique opportunity to read other people's diaries and letters and look through their photo albums, which for a writer is being like locked overnight in a candy factory, or would be for me. Welcome, Michelle. Suzanne Strempek Shea is our Bay Path writer in residence and the brainchild behind the new MFA in Creative Nonfiction, which she and I are both happy to talk about after the reading if you have any questions at all. She is the author of 5 novels, Selling the Light of Heaven, Hoop by Shoop by Donna, Lily of the Valley, Around Again, and Becoming Finola, published by Washington Square Press. She has also written 3 memoirs, Songs from a Lead-Lined Room, Notes High and Low, From My Journey Through Breast Cancer and Radiation, Shelf Life, Romance, Mystery, Drama, and Other Page-Turning Adventures from a Year in a Bookstore, and Sundays in America, a year-long road trip in search of Christian faith. Winner of the 2000 New England Book Award, she is currently touring with her latest work of nonfiction, This is Paradise, from which she'll read today. Welcome, Suzanne. So we'll start with Professor Jarvis, and then with Michelle Barker, and then with Suzanne. They will each in turn read from and talk about their books. After that, we will have questions, and I will invite Judge Ponsor back up here, who will join them at the table, and we'll have questions and a time to discuss, and just ask them anything you want about the creation of the book and the creative process, and just about the magic that goes into creating these wonderful books.
How about now? Well, the pressure's on for us book writers, and we welcome Judge Ponsor into the inner circle, and wonderful to have you. But there's a lot of pressure there, Judge, because we're talking in front of the man who wrote The Hanging Judge, and then over here we have a mother-daughter team that just drove in from New Jersey for this event. A little hand to the people who drove the furthest, I suspect, to be here. Wonderful fellow authors. My book is, let's see, how can I best introduce this? I better do this in a Native American way, because my book's about a Native American. It's not something that I just like to talk about, it's something I like to feel, smell, do, make it real, because as Judge Ponsor just said, it's all imagination until we make it real. So I'm about to make it real. Hold on. I'm going to light Brianna, one little leaf this big of sage. So you get a faint hint, faint smell of my topic. This is called Show and Smell. May our words as writers today be clear and compelling to you. May your ears be attuned to what you've already heard and what you're about to hear. And may we all together in this circle today find beauty. And I'm honored, and I want to reach out to Mr. Jake Ortega, a Winnebago Indian who's in the room. I didn't even know, Jake, you were coming. Thank you so much for coming. That honors me. And all of us. And Jake is leader of the Connecticut River Valley Tribal Culture or Heritage Circle right here in Springfield. And he brought Spider-Woman, his life partner, with him. Spider-Woman, welcome. We're so glad to have you. Now, let's see if I can do, my daughter's here. Who would expect a 17-year-old daughter to come to Dad's event? But she's very valuable in this event because she's a Bay Path graduate. The class of 2002, preschool. I'll never forget the first week my little Hannah's coming home from preschool, and something happened at preschool that changed her life, and mine subsequently. She said, "Daddy, show and tell. It's great." And then her little finger comes up, and it's about this far from the teacher's nose. I'm a teacher here at Bay Path, and she says, "Daddy, show, don't just tell." And so I'm on the inside of the deeper knowledge. Now I'm going to show tell, and smell my way into this topic. Let me show you my visual aid. Now, we live in an era of multimedia extravaganza video aids that bells and whistles, and Greg is the man who knows this stuff. I'm going old school on you. Here's my visual aid. Now, this is a well-suited visual aid for going to powwows, and that's where I go with it. Not a lot of electricity in the woods. A lot of sunshine, a lot of good stuff. I could probably get a solar battery and do something better, but I like this visual aid because it tells everything I need to tell quickly, succinctly. A picture's worth 1,000 words. That is Johnny Paleface. He's a Navajo. Why is he wearing Plains Indian headdress? Because the Indians are getting together these days, and there's this incredible pan-Native American movement going on, and he was being honored by the Lakota Sioux with that headdress for his age and his wisdom, which I'm about to share with you in 3 short readings. I'm going to share his story with you. And let's see. Got to do this right. I've been thinking about this a lot, which is dangerous, because then you have too many choices of where to go. Liana, thank you very much for introducing me as you did. There was one small detail that I have to correct because the judge is here and he wants the facts right. The book felt like it took 10 years to write. Thank you. It actually took 7, which is still a long time. Thank you, Sandy Chmiel, who is my agent, my manuscript editor, dear friend, and another graduate of Bay Path College, not the preschool, the Saturday one-day program. She's been very patient to stay with me on this horse, which is a segue to the next topic, for 7 years. Thank you, Sandy, for your patience. And I just want to do a shout out. There's maybe more between me and Sandy. Sandy, we did it. We did it. We did it. With incredible help from old Johnny. Right in the middle of writing this book, about 4 years ago, a woman by the name of Sister Helen Prejean came to Bay Path College to speak at our women's conference. She wrote this book, Dead Man Walking. And I got a copy, I listened to her speech, and it just hit perfect timing for me in the middle of my book to hear about why she wrote this book. She said, I was a witness to something very important. She said, I felt a moral, an ethical imperative to testify, to say, this is what I saw. She says, what people do with what I say is their business. But I saw something so important. I saw a human being die in terrible circumstances from my perspective. And here's what I want to tell you of what it looked like to watch his eyes, what it felt like to be there, what it smelled like when he died, what I heard and what people said. And that hit me because I was right in the middle of writing a man who could have been a dead man walking, and he chose not to be. He came from the Navajo Reservation, born in 1916, and until his 30s, they didn't change the signs on the restaurants and on the bars, especially in the restaurants and the hotels. No dogs and no Indians allowed. And every time he read that, it reminded him of where he was and what he was facing in his life. At this very moment in time, the average life expectancy on the Navajo Indian Reservation, where he came from, is 58 years. That means there's a lot of dead men and dead women walking, only they're not dying in prison. They're dying on the streets, in the gutters. They're dying from despair. They're dying from hopelessness. They're especially dying from self-hatred. And that's the journey that this man picked up. So Sister Prejean gave me a sense that I need to tell this story. Because America, mainstream America, has left out a lot of the Native American story. I get every year freshmen come in and I tell them, they say, why do you wear this pouch? And I say, the Nipmuc Chibunagungumog people gave it to me. And they're like, what's that? And you know the Nipmuc Chibunagungumog people, right? Because they live on Lake Chicagagog, Manchagagog, Chibunagungumog. The longest place name in North America. 30 minutes from here on Webster Lake, in just south of Worcester, Webster Dudley. They don't even know the folks next door, let alone the Navajo. So I felt I need to testify. I need to say something. Now, there's a lot of reasons we ought to look into the Native American story. I have a doctorate in this area. I could harangue you for hours. I could do a Jeremiad about why you should know more about the Native Americans. I could give you political reasons. I could give you social reasons why a tribe works so well together, a community. I could give you legal reasons because there's a lot of treaties and history behind that. I could give you philosophical, moral, ethical, and even environmental reasons you ought to look in the Native American story. But as you already suspect, and you're relieved I can see by your faces, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is say, I found a story that is so compelling, so powerful, human story, that I need to testify to you of what I found. In the Native American path, in the Native American thread of American history, are stories that will make your jaw drop to the ground, make your mind bend to try to catch up with them. Superlative stories of tragedy and triumph and hope and despair and overcoming and redemption. Now, I've just put a lot of superlatives into that statement. And there is, let us recall, a judge in the room who wants evidence. Can I come up with some evidence to say that, to support my proposition that this really is an amazing superlative story? Well, the evidence I have is wearing the headdress. And he's just one of thousands of men and some women that I stumbled across and discovered that there are right now thousands of American citizens, some of them still living, still breathing, still telling their stories. We lost him 4 months ago. Oh, it's too beautiful to put into words. 7 days after we put the book in his hand, he departed this world. He was waiting for that book. At 97, we weren't surprised, but the timing did touch us deeply. In fact, I presented his book in this room on January 28th. He called me on the phone. It was amazing. He couldn't come because he was too weak to come out of his house anymore. And he was so happy, fulfilled. And then we lost him exactly 7 days later. Now, there are thousands of people like him, here back to my main point, who have been through not one, but 2 genocides in America. Now, doesn't that bring some curiosity to your mind? It's hard enough surviving 1 genocide. How do you get through 2? How did they happen? Why did they happen? And how do you heal from 2 genocides? And the shocking thing is, it may be easier to heal from 2 genocides than it is from 1. Especially in his case, because he lost the first genocide. The Navajo people were part of the Native American genocide, cultural and physical in many cases. And then he marched off to fight Hitler. And he won that genocide. And he came home, and he went to a mental institution, and he sorted it out. And he spent 40 years doing what I'm about to read to you, what he's doing. See, where's my book? Don't want to lose my book. And I even have notes here. By gosh, I should look at those. Let's see. There's one other book I didn't bring here, but it sets up how did this man heal? You've all heard of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's book, Love in the Time of Cholera. I'm tempted, though. He would never let me, and he's still sort of around, so I don't do things he doesn't want me to do with his book. Old Johnny would never let me call his book this, but the best title I can think of now in retrospect is Love in the Time of Genocide. That's one way to heal. There may be other ways to heal, but that's how he healed. He healed through love. Love. 40 years of learning to love better. Each day, a lot of broken romances, 4 divorces because of alcoholism, because of self-hatred, because of war, distance. But let me share with you his love story. Would you mind holding this microphone? Audience interaction here. This is interactive, old style. Let me show you how the love story began on page 24 of my book. Thank you very much. Please give her extra fruit and dessert afterwards. From the beginning, Johnny Paleface learned to look through two crystals at the world. His mother was Navajo. His father had mixed Navajo and Mexican ancestry. Johnny was their 8th and last child. Now remember, I'm talking about love here, so let's see if we can spin this into a love story. He was their 8th and last child. His mother was nearing the end of her childbearing years when she conceived. It was a difficult birth. Years later, Johnny's older sister, Louisa, told him the story. After 2 days of labor and no baby, Louisa recounts that their mother knew she needed help. So she and teenage Louisa walked 2 miles to the midwife's house in the desert outside of Sheep Springs. The midwife immediately went to work. She was a no-nonsense woman. She had Louisa scrub the table with lye soap and help Johnny's mother onto it. The rest went quickly. She gave the patient a piece of wood to bite down on against the pain. Then she cut her abdomen open with a knife and pulled the baby out, just like that. She smacked his little blue-red bottom. He let out a cry. It was a good, healthy cry. The midwife gave the baby to Louisa to clean, and she sewed the mother back up. Refugio remained at the midwife's home for 3 weeks until she could walk again. Then she walked home with her daughter and her new son. She healed fine, but Johnny remembers that she wore a large, wide leather belt for the rest of her life to hold her stomach in place after the kitchen table cesarean section. Little Johnny's first memories are of his fiercely proud mother. Her Spanish last name was Perez. She had been orphaned at birth at a concentration camp for the Navajo called Bosque Redondo. A Navajo couple who had lost their own newborn took her in. Less than 2 years later, they were forced to give her up to the Spanish missionaries at a Southwest mission. This was during the starving time that followed the return of the Navajo to their homelands. It took decades to build up ravaged sheep and cattle herds, to replant orchards, to make farmlands productive again, all of which had been devastated by Kit Carson's scorched earth warfare. Johnny's orphaned mother survived these difficult years only because her adoptive native parents turned her over to people who always had food, the priests at a Catholic Spanish-speaking mission. The padres there did not ask for her Navajo name when they accepted her. They assigned the small girl a new name, Refugio. It means refugee. Johnny Paleface, of course, fell in love with that refugee, his mother. He felt keenly through his whole life, her last baby son, what she had done for him that day and in subsequent days. We're now going to skip to another reading. I've only got 3 for you, so 2 left. Let's see, we're picking up here on page 30. Johnny's maternal grandparents were among the thousands who died in the concentration camp at Bosque Redondo. Their lives were sacrificed to the great cause of American manifest destiny. 2 generations later, their grandson Johnny decided to go heal from a genocide by joining the army, which was the only place he could get equality as a Navajo Indian in the early 1940s. So he joined the military in the 1940s and marched not with the code talkers, he went the other way. And he ended up healing from a genocide by joining the military to fight a genocide, which actually worked out pretty well. Shockingly. Yeah, in fact, he said, I'll just ad-lib here, he said, JJ, he called me JJ. He said, JJ, it was hard to take personally what Kit Carson and the cavalry did to my people when we saw what the white man does to each other. When I saw what white people in Europe were doing to each other, oh my God, I could only feel pity. Who would do that? Who would kill 70 million people over land and power? So let's get back to 2 generations later. He joined the sides of American comrades who were willing to die to shut down another people's concentration camps. These Americans fought as intensely in Europe to stop Hitler's grand version of manifest destiny as their own grandfathers had fought back home to build a grand vision of manifest destiny. We now know that there is another parallel between the 2 destinies. At the heart of each vision was a genocide. Let's see. I'm going to skip to the end here. Yes. So Johnny, he's in this troubled world. And so am I, because I got to hurry up. Page 135. Johnny, as luck would have it, got knocked out of World War II 1 week before it was over. In late 1945, in late spring 1945, and wouldn't you know it, friendly fire, a mortar shell came down from his own troops. He was out on the front, doing the assault, and they were supposed to be giving them cover from the back. So the white man got him again. But he lived through it. He got through it. And he came home. He came home to this ongoing love story with his mother that actually gets paralleled in the last 50 years of his life. He kept looking for that similar kind of love in many other ways. And you have to buy the book to get that part. I'm going to end here on page 130. Johnny came home from World War II, bandaged up, and emotionally devastated, you can imagine. Devastated by what he had done to the Germans with a bayonet. You can't do that kind of stuff and just come home and say, I'm a hero. It doesn't work that way in real life. As soon as Johnny was back on American soil, his first priority was to see his mother. Once he settled in to the Bruns General Hospital in Santa Fe, he requested leave to return to Gallup, New Mexico. It was dusk when Johnny arrived at his mother's house. He'd been gone for 3 years. The place was dark and the front door unlocked. He entered to find the home empty of furnishings. There was dust everywhere. A close family friend who Johnny's mother had helped raise after her children were mostly grown still lived in the neighborhood. His name was Steve, and he had married a woman by the name of Rita. Johnny walked to Steve and Rita's house to find out what had become of his mother. Steve met him at the door and welcomed his wounded friend home warmly. When the subject turned to Johnny's mother, Steve's face darkened. Didn't they tell you? He asked in surprise. Your mother's dead. She died over a year ago, and your sister has moved away. Then he added, do you want a drink? Johnny did. And he then returned to the hospital in Santa Fe, where he stayed for a year, hit rock bottom, decided he was going to heal. Johnny and I, let me close with, thank you for listening. I'm getting a closed sign from the back of the room, which is very helpful for a man like me who dresses so wild and crazy. Let me say that when you sign this book, when I sign this book, you can sign it if you want, but I'm going to sign it. We're going to give you one of these cards of Johnny and a red feather, which is actually a Native American bookmark made out of natural materials and recyclable. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it so much.
Wow. Those are two tough acts to follow. My book is called Mending Horses, and it's about 3 misfits who travel around Western New England in the 1830s. One is a peddler named Mr. Stocking. The second is a young Irish runaway named Billy, and the third is a 16-year-old Irish boy named Daniel, who's sort of a self-taught horse whisperer. And eventually these 3 characters join up with the traveling circus, and Daniel ends up retraining the ponies in the traveling circus who have been abused, so that's where the title of the book came from. And the section I'm going to read to you right now is a little bit before these characters join the circus. Daniel's been kind of an outcast and a reject all of his life. He's kind of awkward and gawky looking, and he's been to a barn dance the previous evening and has met this girl. And so the next morning, Daniel runs across the girl as he and the peddler and Billy are leaving town. Sarah smiled and blushed a little. She'd been making butter. An ivory smear of cream soiled her apron, and 2 long greasy streaks darkened the cloth where she'd held the churn between her knees. Did you come to work for Papa again? She asked. No, we have to move along. He gestured at the peddler's wagon behind him. Oh, when I saw you coming, I thought... She fidgeted with her apron and looked across the road at the potato field that he'd dug yesterday. Well, the silence hung for a moment, then Sarah turned her head as if she just remembered something. "Mama needs some milk pans," she called out to Mr. Stocking. "If you go around to the side." While Mr. Stocking drove into the barnyard, Sarah and Daniel stayed at the gate, not quite looking at each other, but not quite looking away either. Sarah spoke first. "It was fun last night, wasn't it?" "Aye, yes, grand, thank you," he said, forcing the U to come out full and round. "It was kind of you to teach me." His eyes fixed on her hands as something safe to look at, her freckled fingers, her short, ragged nails, her chapped skin. "Teach me to dance, I mean." She picked at a bit of dried food stuck to her apron. "I had a lovely time," she said. Her feet were bare, like his, her toes curling in the dust on the other side of the cart track from his. "Is this your horse?" she asked. He nodded. It was easier to look at the lass's face while she was studying Ivy. The straw-colored hair that had been so elaborately arranged last night was now a single braid coiled at the nape of her neck. Wispy strands escaped and trapped the light in a haze of gold at her neck and temples, softening her angular face. She was all sharp except for her eyes, gold-flecked ginger and cinnamon, crinkling with delight under pale lashes and brows. "She's lovely," the girl said. "May I?" She reached a tentative hand toward Ivy's nose. "Here, she likes this." Not knowing what possessed him, he took her hand and put it on the mare's ear, showing her where Ivy liked to be scratched. The lass stood between them, her hair so close to his face that he felt it like a sunbeam on his cheek. Ivy leaned into their touch and let out a blissful grunt. When Sarah laughed, Daniel felt like one of Mr. Stocking's fiddle strings, plucked and quivering with music. "You're so lucky," Sarah said. "I wish we had a horse." "Sarah," a shrill voice called, "that butter isn't going to churn itself." Just like that, the musical feeling was gone. Sarah drifted away from him, lingered in the grass beside the road. "I have to go." As the peddler's wagon rumbled out of the yard, Sarah disappeared into the house. With a sigh, Daniel collected Ivy's reins. Already the feel of Sarah's hand in his seemed like something he'd imagined. "Daniel!" He turned to see Sarah running back out of the house. "Here," she thrust a little paper-wrapped bundle into his hand. "Some gingerbread for your breakfast." The musty, sour scent of cattle and milk tickled his nose as she came closer, her breath moist against his cheek. And then she was away before he realized that he'd been kissed. They were barely out of sight of the lass's house before Billy began taunting. "Daniel has a sweetheart, Daniel has a sweetheart." Did he now? Surely one kiss and a bit of gingerbread didn't make a sweetheart, especially when he'd likely never see her again. But the thought that he could have a sweetheart, maybe not this lass, but some girl, well, that was something. Billy's taunts wrapped around him like a blanket, making him feel oddly warm and content.
Oh, it was on already. Good thing I didn't say anything about anybody. So yes, you can hear it. Great. So thank you, everyone. I always love the mix of people and topics and delivery and genre that we get here, and the wonderful folks who come to listen. I always like to start any presentation by thanking people who read, people who sell books, people who carry books, people who support authors, because if you didn't do this, we wouldn't get to do this. So thank you very much. And this is actually, May was the 20th anniversary of my first book, and some in the room here have been with me ever since, so I am so grateful. This is Paradise is my 10th book, and I'll just tell you a little bit about how it came about, and I'll do just a brief reading. I was at the Big E in 2001 helping some folks sell their goods from Ireland, and I came back a couple years after that to help again and again, and got into the groove of that. And in about 2004, I noticed a couple of stands up from where I was selling sweaters for Fran Ryan. Some of you might know her from Dingle Linens if you go to the Young Building every September. I noticed someone kept repeating her story. She had some Irish African crafts for sale, not unlike we have at the table back there next to the books. And people would say, well, what are you doing here? And she said, well, my son, Billy, drowned in Malawi in Africa, and I'm creating a clinic in his memory, and I'm collecting donations, and people would sort of shuffle off. And then the next group would come up and say, what are you doing? And she would say, well, my son drowned in Lake Malawi, and I went over there and just decided, I should do something, and I'm creating a clinic. And they would go, off in search of the fried dough or whatever else we look for at the Biggie. And being nosy and being an author, I said, well, I've got to find out the rest of the story. Who is this person? And what's she doing? And who was Billy? And why did she create a clinic? What's there? What is Malawi? I'd never heard of it, really, except for Madonna got her children there. That's about all I knew. And so I went over and became friends with this woman, Mags Reardon. I began to help her at her stand when I had the time, and also got to know her story. And I learned lots of amazing facts about this very amazing woman, and started, as I often do, thinking that would make a great story. I do some freelancing, so I was thinking that would be a great magazine story or a newspaper story. And I told my wonderful husband, Tommy Shea, this should make a story. And as Tommy sometimes does, and I can point to the books in which he said this, he'd say, that's not just a story, that's a book. And the next thing I said was, if it's going to be a book, I'm going to probably have to go to Africa. And he said, of course. So, it's just what you want to hear. You want that someone's being supportive and saying, yes, you should go halfway across the world and find out what this woman is all about. So what I began to do was follow her, not unlike John followed Johnny Paleface. Mine only took 3.5 years of following, but a relatively short amount of time, but it was the longest I've ever spent on a book, to follow this woman who was, before Billy's death, a high school guidance counselor in West Kerry. If you're familiar with that at all, we have a lot of people with roots in the Dingle Peninsula here. She was a guidance counselor in the village of Castle Gregory, north of Dingle, and she had a wonderful family in Dingle. She had a son, Billy, who loved to travel. He would work at the family hostel, and then when he got enough money amassed, he would call a friend and say, let's go to South America, or let's go to Africa, or let's go to Thailand. And they would have a holiday, and then once they ran out of money, they would come back and they would raise more money so they could go away. And so this was the third trip Billy made to the country of Malawi, and he had always told his mother, this is paradise, Mom, you have to come here, you have to come here. And she said, sure, I'll be there someday. But in February of 1999, Billy, on his very first night, returning on his third visit to Malawi, went into Lake Malawi for a swim late at night and did not emerge alive. And so a year to the day of his death, Mags went to the village and finally saw the place with which her son had fallen in love. She came to bring a stone in his memory, and in time began to think, well, I have an education background, perhaps I should do something in the schools here, because it's a country of great need. There's a 90% unemployment, 90% illiteracy rate. There's a 14% HIV/AIDS. There's rampant malaria, you name it. So there's lots of need here. I could do something. Maybe I'll start with the schools. Then she learned that the median age is about 37, and she thought, well, I'm educating people. If I'm going to do this, they might not live that long. So perhaps I should work on their health. And she did not have a health background, but ended up, and with no power tools thrown into the mix, created 10 years ago a clinic that now has served 275,000 people and has really saved countless lives. There was, previous to this, one doctor in an area for 800,000 people. So I followed her. This book is coming out on the 10th anniversary of the clinic. And I'm delighted to have this out here, delighted to tell her story, delighted to get folks thinking about maybe what they'll do in their corner of the world, in the corner of your town or your city or your state or your country, or maybe overseas somewhere, that we just might have something we can throw into the mix and help. So I'm going to read you a little bit about, I mentioned the stone, so the stone will come into view here. The stone is right down the stairs from where Mags has a one-room apartment in the volunteer complex. Her clinic is run all by volunteers from all over the world, and she lives with them there. 8,702 miles away from Ireland, in sub-Saharan Africa, stands another stone. Depending on the day, Mags might pass it 8, 12, 26 times, starting first thing in the morning, when she exits her one-room, second-floor flat, descends the 13 unpainted wooden stairs, and walks to the kitchen or the office or the carport of the Lakefront Volunteer Complex that is her Malawian home. 3 yards to the right of the stairs landing, in a small raised garden, maybe 3 by 4 feet, and edged with clusters of low-growing pink flowers and a palm tree, is the stone Mags delivered here 2 days after the first anniversary of her son's death, in the year 2000, 10 years before the year in which the African leg of the research for this book was done. 1.5 feet of gray stone from West Kerry village of Inch protrudes from the soil, its top edge naturally ragged above the neatly carved words, "This is paradise." That quote from the final communication from a son to his mother and 2 dangling fuchsia shapes bookended by Celtic knots hover above the inscription, remembering Billy Reardon, 1973 to 1999, Dingle, Ireland. A 2-foot-long path from the rocks edging the garden to the base of the stone is clear between the 2 plantings of greenery, but unless someone is weeding, you probably won't see anyone near. The image of Mags Reardon passing the monument with her usual fast-paced walk and without a glance at the memorial might first seem odd until the viewer realizes it would be ridiculous for her to stop and reflect each time. Death is a fact of life for this woman, and the speed with which she flies about and passes the stone 1 or 2 or 4 times a day hits home the fact that she is not here to mourn in the expected manner. Thank you.
Yes, please. I would now like to again thank that brilliant panel and invite Judge Ponsor to join us. You know, one thing that I noticed while listening to the 3 of you, there was a common thread between all of you, and the thread that occurred to me was compassion. A very powerful connection of compassion between all of you that I think is key as writers, that compassion for others, compassion for the world and the people that we look at and the people that we create is a very important part of what makes a good writer, and I really noticed it in our 3 writers. What I'd like to do now is invite questions. Anything, and in the back of the room, Brianna Sittler, standing there in the peach blouse. She's holding a microphone. She will be circulating so that we can make sure that everyone is heard. So I will ask anything at all. There's no such thing as a wrong question. There's nothing that you shouldn't ask. Any area of curiosity that you have about writing, about the books, how these books were created, what would you like to know, having listened to them? And we will start our discussion. Yes?
I want to ask a question of all of you, and that is, if you could ask a question of anyone in your book about compassion, whom would you ask and what would you ask?
Very interesting question. So for any of the 4 of you or all of you, if you could ask a question of any of the characters in your book.
A very quick answer to that. I would ask Nancy, who became Johnny Paleface's life partner for the last 24 years of his life, and who was a registered nurse practitioner, and she was a devoted Catholic. And in the story, you learned very quickly that it was Catholicism that devastated his mother. And then he fell in love with Nancy at the end of his book. And I've never seen greater compassion. We just added an epilogue to the book because Johnny died. She gave him the most compassionate, loving last 1.5 years of life that one could ever hope for, but especially the last 4 days when he was in a coma is, spoiler alert, the most beautiful love story in my book.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Anybody? Judge Ponsor, it looks like you are reaching for the microphone. I'd love to hear from you.
There's a character in my novel named Clarence Hudson, who has a street name Moon, and he's the defendant in the capital case, and he's on trial for his life. And he's had a pretty rough life and has killed at least one person. I think when we talk about compassion, we have to be really careful that it doesn't get too gooey. Compassion is like a lot of nice ideas. Of course, we all want to say it, but it gets hard in practical situations, especially when you're dealing with people who have done tough things and are coming out of tough lives. And so I guess compassion for me is and I don't mean that anyone's suggesting that it is this, it's certainly not the same as just being nice. Yes, compassion is, for me, is sympathetic engagement and generous spirit that engages sympathetically with another person. I guess I've known a lot of really smart people in my life, and a lot of handsome and beautiful people. Smart people are a dime a dozen. Handsome and beautiful people are a dime a dozen. People with truly generous spirits who have real sympathetic engagement with other people are people that have a light inside them, and something we recognize, and it works in hard, hard circumstances. So I would ask Moon Hudson how he would manage to have that light go inside him in his connection with other people, and whether he could. Not everyone can do it.
Thank you. Michelle, I'm curious.
That's really tough. I guess I would ask my main character, Daniel, who goes through kind of a long journey. He's in my first book, A Difficult Boy, as a very tough, at least on the exterior, very tough, hard character trying to sort of shield himself from a world that's been very cruel to him. And in Mending Horses, he starts to soften further than he has at the end of A Difficult Boy, and I think begins to see that he's not the only person in the world who's faced prejudice and who's been put into a position because people have an idea about what he should be that's not the same as what he is. And by the end of the book, he started to see that that he's not the only one in that situation. And so I guess I would ask him, how did he make that journey, and what was the point at which he kind of turned and kind of saw that, and what made him see that he wasn't the only one that had the chip on his shoulder, and that sort of made him understand why other people were in the same situation as himself. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm a little babbling here.
We're following. I am. Suzanne.
Sister Jane is, oops, did I do this? Is it on now? No? Shouldn't touch it. What?
You could use Michelle's.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sister Jane is the perfect person to ask this because she is Miss Compassion of the universe. So thank you, sister, for that great, all you do for the world. And for the gray house, the homework house, our house, every husband's house. Anyhow, so yes, I actually have three people. I have to kind of hog the question because as far as giving it out to people, because I would like to ask Billy, and also since Billy was not the first child that Mags lost, she lost a child to crib death, and she also lost a child to drowning, both of them at 4 months. I would love to be able to talk to those children. And what do you think of your mother? You know, I mean, how does someone, I don't know, get up the next day after you lose one person, one child, never mind two, never mind three, and you know, they're sort of, I tried to speak to everyone I could who was connected to this story, and I certainly could not talk to those three people, but they figure greatly in her life, so I would love to know their impression of their dynamic mother. So, yeah, thank you.
Next question. Yes.
Hello, thank you. I have a question for Judge Ponsor. I wondered, there's such a tremendous connection between the law and language. I mean, it's really so much about, well, how does the law read? What are the words? And so I wondered now, as a writer, if you could talk a little bit about that connection between being precise in your writing what you see in law language?
That's a great question, and it pops up from time to time because, of course, I'm dealing with words really all the time. What is cruel and unusual punishment? What is due process? What is equal protection? And how do we sort that out in the many, many, many contexts that we're trying to apply them? And have a whole room, book after book after book after book, trying to construe the words of our Constitution, which are embodied in a very, very small pamphlet. So language is very important, and people literally live or die, depending on how words are interpreted one way or another. And that's the machinery that we're dealing with. It's a machinery of language which grinds people up or spits them out, depending on how the language is construed. Interestingly, doing legal writing, you begin to think that you can write, but you can't. Judges write first drafts, maybe. Most things that get published, we would call them rough drafts. And if it's really important, it's a first draft. I did a decision last summer in a pretty important case that was 70 pages. It was a pretty significant case, and it took me 5 days to write it with the help of a law clerk, a very good law clerk. 5 days spent on one piece of legal writing is a huge amount of time for a trial judge. The only reason I could get 5 days is because I was quote unquote on vacation and I could devote it to that. So that was 5 days to create a 70-page opinion having to do with a very important issue of interpreting equal protection. 70 pages of publishable fiction would take you 5 months at least to come up with it. So we write and we think, oh, look at me, I'm published. There I am in Federal Supplement. There I am in Federal Second. I'm published. It's Westlaw publishes my stuff all the time. So you think, I could write a novel? No. It's a whole different ball of wax. And so the relationship between legal writing and fiction writing is very tenuous. The effort to be clear is a shared quality, but there's just a lot of differences. I think it's as good an answer as I can give. Thank you.
Another question.
I have 4, one for each. Judge Ponsor, are there any television shows about law and order that you would recommend?
Oh, this is really a sad. I almost never watch television. And whenever I do, I watch the Red Sox or possibly Downton Abbey, which doesn't have too much law in it. So, but I'll dodge the question. So I don't have any recommendations I can make. But if you want to understand the pressures on a person in authority, read George Orwell's essay, Shooting an Elephant. It is the most brilliant piece of writing on how authority gets distorted. It's only 15 pages or so, and it's based on when George Orwell was a police officer in India, and somebody ends up, an elephant steps on somebody, and everybody says, go get the policeman, he's got to deal with this elephant. And so just to be on the safe side, he takes a gun with him just in case. And pretty soon he has a huge crowd following saying he's shooting the elephant, he's going to shoot the elephant. And he gets there and there's the elephant in the middle of the field, perfectly peaceful, eating grass, brushing the grass off on his knees, and he ends up having to shoot the elephant. I've shot a lot of elephants in my time. Shot a lot of elephants. That story is what I would recommend, but unfortunately I can't give you any advice on TV. Sorry.
Professor Jarvis, why did Johnny move to this part of the world?
Refuge. He said every time he crossed the Mississippi to drive home for the last 50 years of his life, he felt an incredible urge to drink alcohol again. He was a recovering alcoholic. And he said, when I saw Navajo people, my own people, lying in the streets, on a Sunday morning, waking up from a terrible drunk, fighting their despair. He said, I wanted to join him. So he retired from the military at Westover Air Base and stayed here for actually close to 60 years. Drove home until age 93 every year in his late model Cadillac. He was a successful Indian. Oh, he sold and gave away 3 houses in 1980. He didn't sell them, he gave them away to family members. He owned 3 houses. And he never lived in a house again after 1980 to 2014. He lived in the guest bedroom of a dear friend.
Oh, it's on, sorry. Michelle, because you write about people that usually people ignore, who are some of the people that you've researched, like in this area, that deserve to be recognized? Historical, you know what I mean? People that there's no monument to them right now, but
Great
should
question.
Boy, that's a hard one. I mean, I think one of the good things that's happened over the past several decades, especially with people interested in genealogy, is that people who have been ignored have been getting attention. So the immigrants who came here from Ireland, from Canada, from Poland, the African Americans, the Native Americans who were still here and were hiding in plain sight, have gotten a lot more attention than they had perhaps up to probably about the 1980s. So I think some of those forgotten people are starting to be remembered more. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of a particular, probably the most maybe not forgotten, but most hidden are probably the Native Americans who stayed in New England and who kind of blended into the American culture. I think those are probably the ones that people tend not to think about as much. I mean, there was sort of this impression, at least in the 19th century, that there were no more Indians in Massachusetts, for example, and they were still all around us. And I think that impression has not quite been corrected. So I'd say that would be my choice.
Question 4.
and I promise this is my last question. Suzanne, what do you think the association is between Ireland and Africa?
When your husband asks a question, I thought it was going to be like, don't forget we have to go see my mother on the way home. So, but yeah. So yeah, thank you. That's a good one, Tommy. I would probably say a lot of co-opting going on, a lot of people coming in and taking perhaps what isn't theirs, land-wise, culture-wise, language-wise. And also for where she is in the country where Mags is now living 8 months a year, it's not unlike if people have gone into Dingle and gone over Connor Pass and go over through the mountains and all of a sudden you see the water and you've got the mountains. It's very visually, that part of the world is much like Dingle. And Billy actually said, it's like Dingle, Mom. It's like Dingle with no rain. So, that kind of a thing where geographically and culturally too, and a history of poverty. And, so I think there's a lot that she was nodding along to when she went there is I'm very far from home, but I'm kind of at home as well. So thanks.
Tommy, thank you. What excellent questions. So, anybody else? Okay, we have a question over here.
I'm not quite sure how to put this, but delicately, it's going to probe your individual brains a little bit because you've all written very different books that we've listened to you read from. When you begin your process, do you have, in one case, I'm sure, John, you have a more linear process because you have an individual that you're following through a life. But when you're writing a fictitious work and you're developing a character or your plot, your story, are any of you moving from A to Z immediately, knowing where you're going? Or do you develop your process as you're moving through your story, especially if it's a novel? Do you have a plot structure already going before you begin that pencil to the paper?
This one works. This one is definitely on. I didn't mean to seize the floor quite so.
Dramatically, but it was great.
I don't. I think everybody has their own way of doing things. I can't know exactly where I'm going when I start out because it goes dead on me. But I have to know sort of where I'm going. I think Robert Frost said in the introduction to his poems, no tears for the author, no tears for the reader. No surprises for the author, no surprises for the reader. And you have to be open to that, at least I do. So I end up with a vague idea of where I want to go and an idea of components, and then I have scenes that I have in mind. And I start creating the scenes. At least I'm talking here as though I know something. I really am totally talking through my hat. I've done this once. And the one time that I did it, I wrote it by scenes. And it became like stringing beads. Stringing beads. A scene, a scene, a scene, a scene. And then you have a collection of scenes. And you might even not write them in the right sequence, but at some point they begin to fall into order and something emerges. And then as you're writing draft after draft after draft, the whole thing begins to cohere. So that's the way it works for me.
We're going to do this in order. My book was kind of a unique process. I thought I knew where it was going. After 1 year, I would spend Mondays with Johnny. You've heard of Tuesdays with Maury? I would drive to his house every Monday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and stay about 2 hours and interview him and tape him. And after 1 year of that, I looked at him and I says, Johnny, this is great. Now we have the outline of the book. Now we got to dig deep. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. He said, no, that is the story. That's the story. We're not digging deep. And, for a whole year, he wanted to tell me this happened and this happened. Then my military unit went here. Then we shot at these people. They shot back. I mean, it was so superficial after a year. 6 years later, oh, my God. What we found, the surprises, the tears, his tears. Often when he spoke of his mother and how she was discriminated against, he would weep. He would weep. It's not hard to join when you see a 94-year-old man weeping over his mother. You're going to feel it too. So thank you, Judge Ponsor, first, that if the author doesn't weep, if the author doesn't find some surprises, the reader probably won't either.
All right. No system here. I don't outline. I start out with a scene that goes I don't know where, somewhere in the middle perhaps. And the next scene that I write might be D, and the next scene I write might be Q, if you're going from A to Z. And then somehow I have to figure out what the connection is among them. And there are a lot of scenes that I write that I don't end up using because I'm just trying to figure out who these characters are, what's going on in their heads, what are they like, what are their personalities like. So I'm not a very good systematic writer or a very good outliner. I just sort of have these random scenes, and then eventually something comes to me that then I see how they're going to connect and how they're going to come together. With Mending Horses, I had the hardest time with the ending of the book. I had no idea what I was going to do with the ending and tried several times and had no success. And then I went to a workshop down in Pennsylvania with a wonderful writer, Ellen Levine, who unfortunately has since passed on, but she was a great mentor and helped me figure out that would be really convenient if somebody died. And that solved the problem completely. That helped me sort of sort the ending out and then figure that out, and then still needed to kind of work out the connecting bits. But it's more like a jigsaw puzzle for me, I guess, than something linear.
Because I hop back between fiction and nonfiction. I have fiction I know, nonfiction I know what's going to happen. It's just a question of structure and how to tell the story. that has its own challenges, but with fiction, I don't know. It's just a matter of, I have a little TV guide synopsis, I call it. You know, Suzanne comes to Longmeadow and can't believe what happens. That's all I know. And I go from there, and I try to write, when I'm in gear with a book, 2 pages a day. And if you can't fit that in for your own life, try the 2 paragraphs or the 2 lines or even the 2 words. That's all the more that you're going to have than your friends who say, well, I always wanted to write, but I don't have the time, you know. And we all have time if we really want to do this. So that's how I fit it in. I get that little idea that really excites me, and I try to keep going with it each day, and it kind of creates its own way, I find.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I want to make sure that we have enough time for the book signing and personal conversations. Question here.
I have a question for Dr. Jarvis. When you said that Johnny Paleface didn't want to go home, but did he attribute a lot of that to his Navajo friends, didn't he, when he was 14?
Yes, and it goes back to the compassion thing. You know, before I even say anything further, a very important part of this whole book story just spoke to you. Her name is Aurora Fox. I call her Mother Fox. She's 78 years old, young. I met her at Dollar Store 2 weeks before I did my first reading. She was wearing a large, beautiful Navajo ring. And I said, ma'am, that's a beautiful Navajo ring. And she said, yep, got it from my hometown. I said, where's your hometown? Gallup, New Mexico. I said, oh my God, ma'am, in 2 weeks I'm going to be reading a 400-page book on a man from Gallup, New Mexico. And she says, I'm coming. She did come. She brought her whole family. 1 week later, she had this inspiration, independent of everything, which often happens in Native cultures. She drew a card, and you saw the cards that I had on the edge of my big poster. She has a long history of drawing cards for family and friends. And they're all Navajo scenes and Southwest scenes, beautiful mesas. On Tuesday, February 4th, 2014, she drew a picture of Johnny going home again, praying to the West and embracing his culture. And 2 days later, she called me and says, I want to meet this Johnny Paleface. I've read the book. I know most of the people in it. And I said, Aurora, he died 2 days ago. She said, was that Tuesday? I said, yep. Oh, I made a card of him praying to the West and going home that day. And that book now is part of the, or that card is part of the gifts I'm giving you. So that's Mother Fox. What was your question again? Oh, I'm sorry. Johnny did come home to his home culture in the end. He kept a safe refuge here, far from the pain, but he made this belt buckle for me. My wife, my dear wife, who came the furthest for this event from 12,752 miles, she comes from South China, and she's wearing a beautiful squash blossom bear claw ring, a bear claw necklace that Johnny made. He returned to his spiritual hobby of making, he made our wedding rings. So he found his own journey back to his culture in a safe way, as we all, I think, ultimately try to do. Enough said. I'm done.
Time for one more question. Gentleman in the back.
Suzanne, I don't think you answered this, but a hallmark of your novels, to me, has always been the surprise hooker that you throw in at the end that takes me as a reader completely by surprise. And just one comes to mind right away in Becoming Finola, when your protagonist goes back to the Irish village and sees that the real Finola is about to get married and just assumes she's going to marry the... I shouldn't give this away, should I? But the question is, do those end of the book grabbers, are those things that you start out with, or do those really come to you along the way halfway through or three-quarters of the way through or what have you, or does it vary from novel to novel?
Thank you so much. Durham Caldwell, one of our local broadcasting news legends, and an author among his own right. He's been here before. Thank you so much, Durham, for remembering more about my stories than I probably do, so I appreciate that. That's really kind. I mean, when we write, we want people to come up and say, 10 years after a book to remember exactly what's going on. Thank you so much. It's really an honor. And I would say, no, it's really, I just have that idea, and you hop around as you construct, it's more like, okay, now I'm going from here to here to here. It's all chronological as far as you'd read it. So I don't know if I do have, that wonderful thing you talked about, if it hits you that way, I don't see it coming. It just sort of arrives. I have a faith in the story. It's going to give me something, hopefully. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. I have one announcement before we wrap up. Another surprise, a literary surprise. This seems to be the month of immersion in literature and writing here at Bay Path. And if you happen to be around on Saturday, June 21st, between 2 and 4, I would love to invite you to come back and join us. We're going to be having an afternoon of reading with a member of our MFA faculty, Kate Hooley. She wrote a lovely memoir about her mother, which won a New England Book Award, I believe. The name of the book is Remembering the Music, Forgetting the Words. She's going to be here with me on Saturday afternoon, June 21st, reading from her book, talking about the process of writing it, and then we're going to follow with a short memoir writing workshop, so a chance to actually try out some of the ideas that you've been hearing here today. So I hope you can join us. There are flyers in the back. And Brianna, where are the writers going to be for the book signing?
Books are here for anybody who wants to buy books, and they're going to stay exactly where they are, and people can line up behind the person they want to have to sign the books. That way, everybody can get through.
Okay, you have your instructions. All right, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you.